They say you walked away without explanation because you are cold, or conflict avoidant, or simply done, and they are not entirely wrong. But none of those explanations accounts for what actually happens inside you in the weeks before the silence. This video is about those weeks, because the explanation everyone reaches for is not the one that fits, and the one that fits is far older than you might expect. Welcome to Power and Myth. There is a particular kind of ending that Sigma INFJs enact that the people on the receiving end almost never understand. One day the connection is there, the next day it is not. No confrontation, no final conversation, no announced decision. The Sigma INFJ has simply stepped back, behind a door that has closed with no sound and no handle on the other side, and the person left standing there is bewildered, because nothing from where they stood appeared to be wrong. And so the explanations begin. Cold, unavailable, emotionally immature, afraid of intimacy, running from something. The Sigma INFJ, if they hear these explanations at all, recognizes something true in each of them, and something profoundly insufficient, because the experience on the inside was not coldness, it was not fear, it was not avoidance. It was something they had struggled to name, because the names they had been offered did not quite reach it. The most common explanation given about the Sigma INFJ is the Introversion Model. ENFJs are introverts. Introverts need solitude. Social and emotional drain accumulates over time. When the drain reaches a certain level, the introvert withdraws to recover. This is true. It captures something real about INFJ neurology, about how introverted intuition operates, about the genuine exhaustion that comes from sustained social and emotional output. But watch what happens when you press this explanation against the actual experience of walking away, because the introversion model predicts temporary withdrawal. Recover, return, re-engage. What the Sigma INFJ actually experiences is not that. What they experience is not a need to recover and return. What they experience is a knowing, a quiet, complete, irreversible knowing that this particular connection is finished. And the introversion model has no account for that. So we need to go deeper, because if it is not introversion, what is it? If it is not conflict avoidance, what is it? The person who walked away did not avoid conflict. They considered it. In the weeks before the silence, they had the conversation many times, not out loud, internally, with a precision and a thoroughness that the other person would have found astonishing. The INFJ is not afraid of difficult conversations in the sense of being unable to think them through. They are extraordinarily capable of thinking them. What they perceived after thinking it through was that the conversation would not change anything. Not because the other person is incapable of change in the abstract, but because of what the Sigma INFJ's introverted intuition had already concluded about the pattern beneath the behavior. An I-dominant cognition does not read surface events. It reads the structures that generate surface events. And by the time the Sigma INFJ has read the structure clearly enough to trust it, the conversation has already happened inside them. The external version would be repetition, not resolution. This is where the coldness accusation becomes interesting, because coldness implies the absence of feeling. And what was actually present in those weeks was an extraordinary amount of feeling, grief often, a specific kind of mourning for what the connection was or could have been, or what the Sigma INFJ had believed it to be. The internal processing that precedes the silence is not disengagement. It is some of the most intense engagement the Sigma INFJ can handle. The silence that follows is not the absence of something. It is the end product of a process that was almost entirely invisible to the person it concerned. Here is the question this raises. If the processing was so complete, so careful, so full of feeling, if the decision was not made out of coldness but out of a kind of exhausted clarity, why no explanation? Why does the Sigma INFJ not offer what they arrived at? Why not share the conclusion of the internal conversation, even if only to give the other person something to hold on to? This is where the conflict-avoidance model makes its strongest case, and this is also where it breaks down most completely. The Sigma INFJ does not withhold explanation because they are afraid of the response. They withhold it because introverted intuition, operating at full depth, produces conclusions that resist translation into the kind of linear, evidenced, step-by-step account that explanation requires. The INFJ knows what they know. They cannot always show their working. And they have learned, often at significant cost, that the attempt to show it produces a particular kind of pain, the pain of watching someone dismantle a perception that is correct because the perceiver cannot produce a courtroom standard proof. The silence is not cowardice, it is the protection of a knowing that is real but not easily defended. And underneath that protection is something older than personality type. What you are actually describing is the exile archetype. Not exile in the sense of punishment or rejection or defeat. Exile in the Jungian sense, the consciousness that has always operated outside the village, that has always perceived the structures beneath the surface, that has always known things the community around it could not verify and therefore could not accept. This is not a metaphor. In Jungian archetypal psychology, the exile is the pattern of consciousness that is structurally separated from consensus reality. Not by choice, not by dysfunction, but by the nature of how it perceives. The Sigma INFJ's need-dominant cognition places them, perceptually, outside the frame of reference that most social interactions assume. They see the pattern. They cannot always produce the evidence for the pattern. And the attempt to explain the ending is, at root, the attempt to translate a perception that exists outside the shared frame into language that assumes the shared frame. It almost never works. The exile does not withhold explanation from cruelty. The exile withholds it because they have learned that what they perceive cannot be made legible without being distorted. And a distorted version of the truth is not an explanation. It is a different kind of harm. The shadow of this archetype is also worth sitting with, because the exile pattern has a wound inside the gift. The same nigh-dominant clarity that allows the Sigma INFJ to perceive what others cannot, when it is not integrated, becomes a form of self-isolation that is no longer protective but imprisoning. The INFJ who has lived too long in the exile pattern begins to assume, before the evidence is in, that the attempt at explanation is pointless. They stop testing whether this connection, this person, this moment might be different. The silence becomes reflexive rather than chosen. The withdrawal happens before the processing is complete. This is the shadow, not the wrongness of the perception, but the premature certainty that it will not be received. Integration of the exile archetype does not mean the Sigma INFJ begins explaining themselves to people who cannot hear it. It means they develop the discernment to know which silences are protection and which are preemptive surrender. If you have watched this video and recognize the experience it describes, something has already shifted. The explanation you were given, or gave yourself, about why you walk away without words was probably not entirely wrong. It was just not deep enough to reach the real thing. The exile archetype is ancient. It is in every culture's mythology, in every tradition's story of the one who perceives beyond the community's consensus and lives therefore at its edge. You are not cold, you are not broken, you are not conflict-avoidant in the ordinary sense. You are carrying a cognitive pattern that has always made full explanation difficult, not because you are incapable of it, but because what you perceive is genuinely difficult to translate. Knowing that does not remove the difficulty, but it changes your relationship to it, and it changes what the silence means. What did the dismantling reveal for you? Was there a moment in this video where the common explanation finally broke down, and something else became visible? Tell me in the comments. This is how we do it at Power and Myth, not by telling you what to think, but by going deeper together. Subscribe if you want to keep asking the questions that actually matter. Until next time, find your power, know your myth.